conversation for the people. What to do when encountering the police. Listen, we're in a church, so this may seem a little churchy to you tonight, but I do have with me a very capable panel of intellectuals, if you will, that will help us have this conversation. Tonight, once again, I'm calling this a conversation for the people. And so you may be saying as you're sitting there that, that Birmingham citizens may not be represented in this crowd. That's because this is a conversation for the people. I've talked with those that are on the panel tonight, and they are willing to have a subsequent conversation that will be a conversation with the people. But tonight, it's the conversation for the people. I'm going to take a short moment to pray because we are in the church, and then we're going to move forward. Father, I thank you for this time. Thank you for those that have allowed their time to be here tonight and to share in the conversation for the people. Bless our time together. Cover us and keep us. Bless us, Father, even as we make opportunity for our community to be a better community. We pray that in Jesus' name. Amen and thank God.
Amen.
So what we'll do now, let me begin by saying that although I believe that there is a considerable disparity in the way black and brown people are policed in contrast to whites, I do not believe, hear of the kind of policing that we see on a constant basis on social media here in Birmingham. So what we are not doing tonight in this forum is pointing a finger at the Birmingham Police Department because of something we've seen or heard. However, we do understand that the Birmingham Police Department isn't perfect, and nor is Citizen Joe Blow when we encounter the police. So all of us can stand to benefit from this conversation tonight. So our heart and our goal today is to, number one, have a conversation about how we deal with and encounter the police and how they should do and treat us as citizens. Number two, we want to inform our community of what to do when we encounter the police. So, I said all of that with my mic off. And so what we'll do first of all is we're going to start right here with Miss Destiny Love, and we'll go that way, and she'll introduce herself, maybe say a couple of things about herself. I'm going to come back to you, and we'll have some conversation after that. Ms. Love.
Hello, so happy to be here. Hey guys, my name is Destiny Love. I am a licensed independent clinical social worker, and I absolutely love to talk about trauma, especially in the Black community. And I have a small private practice downtown, Love and Associates.
Hey, I'm Chris Coleman, the VP of Programming for Courtney French Broadcasting and V94.9 WATV. Do a talk show every day called A Think Tank Every Day, and we handle and talk about issues that affect the community. And I'm just glad to be here, to be with this esteemed group here, to be able to talk about some more stuff to educate the people that we have here.
Good evening, everyone. Danny Carr, District Attorney, Jefferson County. I'm here obviously to take part in this conversation, and I want to just first say, because we are in the house of the Lord, I want to always give thanks to the Lord, and also, Pastor, thank you for opening your doors and having a vision to have this conversation. And I'm just proud to be a part of this esteemed panel, and I look forward to having some great dialogue and hopefully having some substance to it.
Good evening. My name is Chief Patrick Smith. I'm the Chief of Police for the Birmingham Police Department. I look forward to the conversation and hoping that this will open the doors to many more conversation, not just conversation, but more so resolution, more so direction, more so working together with the community.
Good evening, Detective Kyle Johnson. Glad to be here. Looking forward to answering any questions you guys have. Let's get to work.
All right. Thanks to every one of you for being a part of the panel tonight. If you will, probably about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, I felt in my heart a pressing, let me be churchy for a second, a pressing of the Holy Spirit to have this conversation. In my heart and my mind, I am an ex-police officer, for those of you that may not know that's watching this panel. But in my heart and my mind, I have not seen this conversation being had. I'm quite sure it maybe is going on somewhere, but just the simple conversation of what does a citizen do when they are encountering the police. We've not seen this. So I wanted to bring it to the community in a way that they could hear from Birmingham Police Department, Birmingham's top cop, and I'm so glad that he agreed to be here tonight. And of course, our district attorney is here tonight. Amen. Who better to be here to help have this conversation? And so we're going to take off. I want to read something real quickly for you tonight as we move forward. Out of the book of Romans, the 13th chapter, I'm going to read a few verses and then we're going to kind of take up. This is the King James Version of the Bible, and I don't want to make this a Bible study, so I'm just going to read the scripture. Y'all bear with me. I'm just going to read. I was reading over this earlier, and I had to say to myself, you're supposed to read it and not teach it. So here's what it says. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God, and whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation, for rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the powers? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. So I'll stop that right there. As I say that probably really needs a little bit of explaining, but I won't go there. I want you to read that in your own time, if you will, and I don't want to prolong our conversation. So tonight, once again, we're going to push forward with our conversation. I want to start this time off as it relates to the panel. I want to start this time off by kind of asking a question to Mrs. Destiny, and that is this. Why is the behavior that we're seeing throughout the country, why is it, I'll just ask it like this, why are we seeing the polarizing effect that we're seeing as from George Floyd, and of course before that, prior to that, it seems like the behavior has really escalated in a way that's almost uncontrollable. From the standpoint where you work and see as a counselor, why are we here?
Okay.
Why are we here?
That's a great question. And I think, and I'm so thankful that we're having conversations like this. We have to do more of this, because one thing that I see is that we don't want to talk about the root of a thing. So oftentimes we, even in our interactions, it's very superficial, it is very outward, but what we don't just do on a regular basis is talk about the deep, right? We don't go deep. So when you think about what we're seeing right now, we are seeing so many layers of issues, and they have to be peeled back. But one thing that I do want to identify is that there is trauma in the Black community. There has been historical trauma, multi-generational trauma. So it's not just one trauma, right? So if we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, that's one trauma. And some of the symptoms of that are, I'm just gonna read just a few of them. Flashbacks, detachment from others, insomnia, anger, feeling jumpy, nightmares, drug and alcohol to cope, and avoiding reminders of whatever that trauma is. So that is when there's a single trauma. But what we see in the Black community are layers upon layers upon layers of trauma.
So if we can push off of that a little bit, so then are you saying that the response of Black people to the police department has to do with the layers of trauma, as you call it,
Absolutely.
that's going on from historical
Yes.
issues.
Absolutely.
Talk about that if you will.
And what begins to happen. So if we want to, so we're thinking about a body of people, a community, right, that came out of 300 years of slavery. So then what began to be maladaptive behaviors became very normal in the black community, right? So we don't talk about how those were some survival behaviors because of the situation. We have just adapted them, and then we have passed them down from generation to generation to generation. And what we see is that we have not moved from survival mode oftentimes to thriving. So we're still surviving. So even if there's a fight or flight response to stress, right? So if an individual is in a stressful situation, and mind you, they're already impacted by stress, then you're going to see some of the things that we're seeing
Good,
in the
good,
news.
Good. So then let me ask this, so the videos that we're seeing
Yes.
on a constant basis, Facebook, Instagram, wherever we are, social media, how does that impact the behavior that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis?
It absolutely perpetuates it. And those that know me, I do not like watching the news. I actually encourage people to not watch it as much as you possibly can. Sure, there's a fine line to it, right? We want to be informed. But what it is doing, it perpetuates the trauma, and it re-triggers and it re-traumatizes. And then what you have are people on alert. Now they're fearful. Then you're walking into a store, and then now you're automatically looking at, side-eyeing people because you've been re-traumatized. And I think it's all a part of a system, and we have to be aware of those systems.
Thank you, thank you. Chief, if you will, coming from the other side of the world, if you will, all the way down south to Birmingham, Alabama, can you just talk to us about what you see as it relates to behavior in policing and the difference in what you see now and what you saw earlier on in your career?
Okay, so let me start like this. Early in my career, I started just before the Rodney King incident in Los Angeles. I was there for the riots. I was there for the burning of several buildings and the uprising, but I was also there for the subsequent consent decree, several things that went on to build bridges within the community. Also, a number of things that happened there to try to bring about change within the organization and also bring about best practices in law enforcement. In coming here, quite frankly, in my opinion, we should be having a completely different conversation because coming from there, I was on a police department where it was probably less than 7-8% African Americans out of 10,000 employees. And so for an African American man from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, to then go to a large organization where you are, there are 10,000 sworn and another 3,800 non-sworn personnel working for one department. So for myself, it was nothing unusual for me to be the only African American in the room. And in the latter parts of my career, I was probably one of 3 African Americans leading the organization from the rank of commander in teaching and training the organization. And so that's a completely different look than what we have here in Birmingham. So I think we should be having, quite frankly, a different conversation in the fact that how do we exhale? How do we take a grasp of what we have? And then how do we exhale? excel into the future. And the reason I say that is because you have a situation here where the organization, and being the police department, is well over 50% minority. You have an African-American mayor, an African-American police chief, African-American council folks. You have an African-American DA, African-American DA in the Bessemer Cutoff. You have an African-American sheriff. I mean, so certainly many of the things that she mentioned exist in the nation, and we should certainly be a part of the national conversation. But from my eyes and the things that I've seen and where I've come from, I recognize the difference. I can see the night and day patterns. I can see the progress where some people see no progress. I can see some successes where some people cannot see those successes.
So as you say that, then, can you give us just a brief synopsis of what are the things that you're doing, what are the things that you want to do to see Birmingham Police Department in particular and Birmingham as a whole excel? What are the things that you do?
You know, to me, I think that Birmingham could easily catapult itself well into the future. If you even look at the protest here in Birmingham, we didn't handle this like a military grade interaction. We did not come out on our citizens in that way.
If you're on Facebook, you ought to throw up some hand claps right there. You really ought to throw up some hand claps right there.
And if you look at many of the things that they are talking about reform, now keep in mind that I said that I started there and I worked through a consent decree, and then my last 3 years there was over training the department, over 3 police academies, over the in-service training, the ranges, so training the entire department of 10,000 officers and retraining the department. So in coming here, many of the things that were thrown out in terms of reform, I'd already started day one upon arrival. We're not using chokeholds on our folk. We're not placing our knees and necks in that method. We're not doing that. And many of the other items that have been thrown out there in terms of reform were removed from the policy here day one, or have already been modified.
So we did have to remove them.
No, what I'm saying is the policy has been primarily updated, and so there was this notion that officers are not held accountable. And that's why I released the accountability report showing the disciplinary actions, the steps that we're taking, the corrective action, the training, everything that we're doing to move the department forward. So that's why I said here, I think we should be having a different conversation in how do we catapult ourselves, how do we uplift all of the community and everyone here within the community.
Great. I'm going to come back to you because I want to ask a question somewhat about that, but I want to go to the DA, if you will, sir. Just talk to us about just the next step as it relates to someone encountering the police officer on the street, amen, and of course, if that person goes to jail, then there's a next step, and somewhere in there, that step comes to.
Yeah, and let me echo Chief Smith's sentiments. You know, we're in a unique position here in Jefferson County. We all work together. Chief Smith and I talk all the time about different things and about different issues that may come up. We've had conversations, some of them good and some of them where we may have conversations about differences of opinion, but we have conversations that ultimately we form a consensus about and that we try to work together to make sure it's for the good of everybody. And the reason that's important is because obviously once someone is encountered on the streets by the police, and I've never been an officer, but I'm from a neighborhood where in Ensley, where oftentimes a bunch of my friends and myself as young men, we've been encountered.
That's home, sir. That's home.
That's home. and not all of them were bad experiences, you know, but not all of them were great. But people have to understand that you're not going to win on the street. You have to understand that the main goal is for the officer to feel safe and for you to be safe and careful and make sure that you both live another day. If you go to jail.
I hear, and I'm cutting you off. I
Yeah.
am cutting you off. Most people say, well, I ain't trying to cut you off. I
Yeah.
am trying to cut you off.
Okay.
So I hear as you say that, we from the same area. So
Yes.
I almost just said Danny.
Yeah.
You know, I hear as you say that, and I literally heard what you said, and so I know your heart. So your verbiage was that to make sure the officer is safe and then to make sure the citizen is. So I hear the citizen right now.
Absolutely.
I hear them right now saying, what about the citizen being safe? And I know you said that.
Yes.
You backed up that statement.
Absolutely.
And so citizens are saying right now, what are we doing to make sure citizens are safe?
Well, I think there's a presumption that people think because you have on a uniform, you're robotic and you're not fearful of anything. That officer want to go home too.
Yeah, exactly.
All I'm saying is when you encounter someone on a dark street with dark windows, that officer walks up to the car, that officer is fearful. He doesn't know what's going to happen or who's in that car. We're having a frank conversation, so let's be honest about
That's
it.
good stuff, man.
He doesn't.
I love it.
He doesn't. But at the same time, let's be honest, that citizen doesn't know what officer he or she is getting either
That is
and what mood they're in.
That's good. That's good.
This is the root of what, this is the real part of the conversation.
This is it.
Right.
This is it. Yes, sir.
So at that point, your mindset should be, I can't win on the street. I need to trust that there's a DA and people in place in the court system where I can go and be heard if I need to be heard, and that there's a mechanism in place, you know, another step, that at that point, that is my forum to be heard, to say what I need to say, to get my point across, to have whatever defense I have as to why I shouldn't have been charged or whatever it is. But that's where you are heard. That's where, at that point, that forum is set up for that purpose.
Great.
And I think that that's the real part of the conversation that a lot of people, you know, don't talk about or don't want to talk about, but it's real.
I spent 6 years, 4 months, a little change on the streets as a Birmingham police officer. My wife would tell you that when I woke up in the morning and put on that blue uniform and headed out my door, my whole goal was to come back home.
Absolutely.
My goal, and to do my job, but after my job is done, is to come back home. I hear you. And so police officers are real people. And so, and at the same time, as Chief said, and he's doing, I think, a great job at that.
Oh, yeah.
They've got to be held accountable, just
Absolutely.
as the citizen has to be held accountable for the things that we do. Ms. Destiny, I'm coming to you in a second. She
Quickly
had
have
her
to
hands
jump in, of course, because and I think about all the people that I serve, right, who may not have the same capacity as somebody in leadership. And it's actually something that we do need to continue to discuss, because once you are in a position of leadership, there's a higher standard, right? So when we're interacting with somebody, right, that may be displaying some of these symptoms, they may have some high risk factors, right? They may have some substance use, some all mental health issues. I think it is very maybe even a little bit irresponsible for us to expect for them to know that, for them to expect that they're going to go to a court and be heard, because 9 times out of 10 they're not, right? And that is where we have to have some real dialogue about leadership. Like, what training is leadership going through? What was your mental health, mental health work? Because for you to expect somebody that is maybe out doing something illegal to respond in a rational way, that's just not always realistic.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So then that citizen's mindset is not necessarily thinking, I'm going to make it to the next step of the process.
Absolutely not.
Right, great. What's the citizen saying? DJ Chris Coleman.
The citizens, it's twofold. And I grew up in Fairfield. But as I grew up in Fairfield, I went to Fairfield High School. I lived right down the street from the school. My mom was on the city council out there. So I knew all the police officers. But we saw the police officers in Fairfield at the high schools, and they would come to the football games, they will come to band practices, they will come to the auditoriums. We knew them by name. We knew Chief. We knew this guy. We knew. So if we were out and we were doing something, he could say, hey, Chris. Oh, that's Chief, blah, blah, blah. What I do now? You know, they acted as parents because they would walk the streets out in Fairfield. We didn't have that type of issue. I grew up in Fairfield, but I also came to Birmingham. I had friends that went to Parker, had friends that went to West End, I had friends that went to Inslee. And as a
You have
young
any friends that went to jail?
Jehovah, I got a wife with went. I
That's-
had a wife that went to jail, graduated in '85. So you know, I used to hang out over there at McAlpine Park to
Gotcha.
come watch Jackson Nolan, you know, band practice, you know. But
Best
coming up,
band in the town.
yeah, man, yes. And I was in Fairfield's band, and I'm telling y'all that G.O. band was ridiculous. But anyway, as a citizen coming up, my dad taught me about being a man, standing on your own, but also standing on your own means you have to respect the man of law. And all you have to do is when he asks you a question, son, look him in the eye and answer the question. If you get pulled over, don't make any moves. Just go, is there a problem, officer? He's going to come up to you and say, hey, man, can I get your driver's license? Hey, man, I'm reaching in my wallet to get my driver's license. Is that okay? Yes. These are some of the things that my dad taught me at 16. Don't, this guy is doing his job. And 9 times out of 10, when the cop talk to you or the police officer talk to you, by the end of it, he just giving you a warning. Well, hey, man, look, slow down. Because they basically just want to know, are you okay? It's just when you come there, you got an attitude with them. Now you're making their job difficult. Now, and like I said, I think I was one of the lucky kids because we grew up in an area at the time where Larry Langford was the mayor.
Yeah.
And he didn't play that with these police officers at all. He didn't play. So when we grew up in Fairfield, the police officers knew you by name. So that means they could come knock on your door and tell your mom, I got Chris out here in the car. He was around there at the school, blah, 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 blah. I thought I'd bring him home.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? You knew them. They knew you. And it's the same thing we were talking about earlier, Pastor, about, I think, getting back the trust in the community, the trust with the citizen, and the trust with the police. And it's that, I think the events that have happened that we see on the news, like you talk about, it's a we keep putting a Band-Aid on that gaping wound when we really need to take the Band-Aid off.
Gotcha.
and disinfect that thing and then stitch it up, then put a tourniquet over it, then cover it so the thing could heal. And I think we're not getting that type of treatment now. Birmingham don't have those issues at all, but I know they got them in Atlanta. I was in Cincinnati. I know they got them in Cincinnati.
Right.
And the problems that we, like you said, well, we see what we see, black chief, black DA,
Yes.
So it's, something happens. Danny Carr told me this too. Chris, if you mess up, I'm going to put you in jail. Did you not tell me that?
I did.
Yeah, he did. And this been my friend for years. And he said,
I did.
Chris, if you mess up, I'm going to put you in jail. So guess what? I don't mess up because Danny Carr will come right there and look at me in jail and say, didn't I tell you I was going to put you in jail? So I think the trust issue with us, and that's just that Band-Aid. We keep putting a Band-Aid over a wound that's bleeding.
Okay.
And we got to just stop the bleeding.
Great, great. And so we're going to have that conversation. Before I go any further, if you are watching us right now, I need you to tag 7 people and share this broadcast. 7 people. I need you to tag, stop what you're doing, tag 7 people and share this broadcast right now. Thank you. Appreciate you. Hey, listen. So here's what we want to do. Well, let's talk to Detective Cal Johnson, who has been in the department for how many years now?
Right at 13 years.
Right at 13 years. This may be somewhat of an unfair question. You push it however you need to push it, but what's the sentiment, if you know that, of the Birmingham Police Department per se, as it relates to the community? And I know you're a detective now, and it's maybe a little different, but can you just talk about just the sentiment, if you will, in the department as it relates to the community?
Great question. Being a detective, we interact with the community and patrol officers as well. More so with, believe it or not, more so with the patrol officers, which I would say has a great relationship in the communities of Birmingham, simply because it's not a time that I can't call an officer if I'm looking for someone or have questions for someone, to call up, the beat officer and say, hey, Joe Blow that lives this. Oh yeah, I know him. His mama is, he works at such and such. So overall, we have a great, in my opinion, we have a great connection with the community, although it could be better.
Gotcha.
Can I put a different spin on it?
Yes, sir.
So one of the things that I saw, and we've been working on tremendously, is I see it that we cannot just have a conversation with the community when things are wrong. We need to have a conversation with the community all the time. So one of the things that I did was to create a completely different unit, place a captain over there, additional officers just to deal with contact and community engagement.
Great.
So this is why you see the food giveaway that we had, where we had 2 of them so far and have another one coming up, where we so far have given food to like 1,500 families in Birmingham. This is where we had the toy drive, where this Christmas, where we partnered with the school to create where the kids built a large Christmas sleigh, and we went about the community. We collected over 2,000 gifts, toys and bikes and books for kids, and we took it about the community, because my whole thought process is we have to have constant engagement with the community. We have to build that relationship with kids on a daily basis, and more importantly, they have to be able to talk to us and trust us. And in that vein, when we even delivered gifts throughout the community, there were some kids who wouldn't even come up to the sleigh to collect a gift. We actually had to go out and talk to them and give it to them, and to try to break down those barriers. So in my mind, we have to have ongoing engagement, ongoing activity, ongoing communication, so that we're all working together as one community.
That's amazing. I think that's great. And so that unit that you created is somewhat, what do you call that unit? Is it community engagement unit?
Yes.
Yes. Community engagement. That's great.
Community engagement and education, because we're also put on the Community Police Academy and things of that nature, so that we are training the community in what officers do on the street on a daily basis.
Great. I talked to somebody about that the other, some time ago, because I know about that academy, and of course I'm an ex-police officer, so I know, probably, and so I think that's a good thing. Let me push this little piece, as, if you will, Chief, with all that's going on nationally. There's a lot of talk about citizen review boards. What's your thought on that?
Well, you know, citizen review boards. Now, typically, citizen review boards would have a specific place of things that they are reviewing. Much of that is already in place in a number of areas here in Birmingham, such as, that's why the Jefferson County Board was created, who handles hiring of individuals, the hiring process. For disciplinary action, it goes through a hearing officer, a 3-judge panel, so forth and so on, to ensure that that is being reviewed. Birmingham Police is also an accredited police department, so our policies are reviewed, and we have to go through an on-site review of everything that we're doing. So there are certain areas that are already under constant review. They remotely log into our policies and procedures to make sure that we have up-to-date standards and practices throughout law enforcement. So there are a number of areas that are already under review for the department. And so when we say citizen review, it's just a matter of what space are we saying we are reviewing.
Well, let me ask a subsequent question, I guess, then. How are those, well, what boards are there that actual community, because that seems like maybe a post or somebody that's kind of looking into.
No, not APOST. Because you remember that where the state comes in, APOST is the credentialing part. ALEA, whenever there's an officer-involved shooting or something of that nature, or a law enforcement-related injury that is significant, then they're the ones conducting the investigation from the outside of the police department.
So then how is the citizen, the natural citizen, engaged in that kind of review? Or is there something that, and how is that citizen, if that's the case, how is that citizen selected?
Okay.
I'm not saying that there is, I'm asking, is there a review board that natural citizens, Joe Blow from Ensley, Joe Blow from Roebuck, somebody that may be a council or a board that 2 or 3 citizens sit on, maybe a police officer or 2, or a business person or 2 sit on, that actually have some kind of engagement as it relates to the behavior of police officers?
Okay, so that's the part where I started out. That's where the Jefferson County Board comes in. Every officer that is disciplined comes before myself or one of the deputy chiefs, and when it is reviewed, it goes through the Jefferson County Board, and that is where it goes before a hearing officer, and then it is reviewed by a 3-judge panel for the disciplinary process.
And where does that 3-judge panel come from?
From the Jefferson County Board.
From the Jefferson County?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
So that's one of the things, even after you read Romans 13, which I absolutely love, and right, it's truth. We love the Word of God, but we have to keep in mind the hearts of the individuals in any position, in any leadership position, right? If we're doing more of the same, then it's not going to get the outcome that we're wanting. So even when I think about leadership, I think about what process has the leader gone through in order to be in that position? Because I believe that is where we're going to begin to see some of the change. When we begin to really do some of that hard work, some of that inner work as it relates to with leadership.
But yeah, and a lot of people take their word leadership and don't know that you got to be a great servant in order to be a great leader. You got to know how to serve.
Of course.
Jesus was one of the greatest servants I knew. He washed the feet of his disciples.
That's right.
You get what I'm saying? So what a lot of people don't know is that it's different types of leaders. Like, you know, I lead an entire radio station, but I lead from behind. You know, I let my people shine. But if something's wrong, I'm there to help them. That's one of the main things that a leader does. Plus, I was in the United States Air Force, you know, and I served, you know, overseas. And over there, you got to be able to have your eyes open. You got to be able to listen. A lot of your leaders don't have a hard time grasping the word listen.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think that's one of the main things that a leader should be able to do is listen. Because if you listen, you can comprehend. And if you can comprehend, you can be able to help those that need help. And that's some of the problems that we have with some leaders, not all leaders. Some leaders just don't know how to listen. And I think that's one of the main things that you have to take. And I remember that from being in the Air Force, going through basic training, when my drill sergeant just looked me dead in the face and said, "Son, if you can't listen, you'll die." So, people will perish because of lack of knowledge. So if you got this man giving you all of this information and then you're not listening, but you're hearing, you can hear all day, but are you listening? So a lot of that goes back to the police officer. Are you listening
So good.
to these people here?
Can I say one more thing?
Go ahead.
Last thing, and
Doesn't have to be the
also,
last thing. We got probably about another 20, 25 minutes,
Yeah, go
if
ahead.
it takes that long. But we want to get into some really particulars in a moment, though. Go ahead.
and also with good leadership, they understand self-awareness. So a good
Yeah.
leader understands where their biases are. They understand where their areas of weakness or area of improvement are. So even going into a situation, you already know what your stuff is, and then you know how to put your stuff in check for the greater good.
Yeah.
Right. And so even as we talk about leadership, we if we wanted to kind of really just kind of hone that in, training for police officers, how many weeks? How many weeks? I don't remember. The academy's 5 months. 5 months. And I know what I do know is there's a lot of leadership training there. I know that there's a talk to us about training. Then
Well, one of the things that I did was modify our training so that we not only go through the academy now, but now every other month officers must go through a regular training day. So, so that we are constantly staying relevant to what's happening, so that things that we see happening on the street, they don't repeat themselves if there's an issue. But we're also updating training. So every other month, that officer, starting, it wasn't like this previously, and I'm sure he can tell you that. But we wanted to increase the level of training for each officer to make sure that we were addressing the community needs, making sure that we are updating ourselves on the law and the practices of what we do on a daily basis.
Great.
Can I ask a?
Sure.
So even with some of that training, I think, and of course I don't know all the training, but I would love to know about the inner work. So what inner work are they doing? What about mental health assessments?
Absolutely.
Those things are included?
Yes, you have to have updates on mental health training. A lot of people don't know it, but we do have social workers within the police department that work at the various precincts. And so we have to update ourselves on the regular skills, but we also address the soft skills that officers need and how to communicate with people. And quite frankly, straight out customer service.
Great. All right. So, as we move forward, and of course, Chief, most of these questions may be for you or Detective Johnson, or the DA could probably jump in there, and if we have some maybe dialogue on these questions, let's jump in. And so these are like flat out there in your face, pointing your questions.
Right.
So the first one would be this. What does a citizen do when stopped by the police? I know that's kind of broad. Just citizen driving down the street, and regardless of what the infraction is, police pulls up behind him, lights on, boom.
Okay, so we just completed a video that we're going to release regarding interaction with the police.
Great.
The whole idea is to kind of standardize a transaction, because essentially you are being stopped just to give you some pointers on what to do, how to respond, communicate with the officers. And, you know, in many instances, this is not something that's designed to be a hostile situation.
Right.
It could be something such as a minor infraction to whereas we are trying to give you information. And so, look, I may be the police chief, but at the end of the day, when I'm going to Home Depot and I have my jeans and slacks, or jeans on and my dirty shirt,
Right.
I'm still just a black man in
You're
America.
citizens, correct?
So, you know, the point of the matter is, just make the transaction as easy as you possibly can. If it's at night, stop your car, place your hands where you can see it. And one of the greatest things that you can do, turn on the dome light. Let the officer see what's inside of the car.
Cool, that's information.
And
That's good.
wow. Let the officer.
Chief, keep your thought. I don't know if you guys heard that or not. That's good information. Chief said that if you're stopped by the police at night, amen, of course, he talked about putting your hands where you can see them. But one of the things that I haven't thought about, I was a police officer, turn on your dome light. So that you then become less threatening to a police officer. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the easiest things you can do. Turn on your dome light in your car. Why? If the officer's coming up, they can see how many people in the car. If you have kids in the back seat, they can see what's going on in the car. You place your hands where you can see them. And the most important thing is communication. Typically, the officer will introduce themselves, tell you why they're there or what's going on. And if they say, you know, the reason I stopped you is because of your speed, can I see your license, registration, and proof of insurance? Absolutely, officer, give me 1 second. My license are right here. My registration is over here, and my insurance is right over here, and I'm going to get those items right now. So now what have you done? You've communicated with the officer, you've told them where things were, and you told them that you were going to retrieve those items as requested. And then you give them to them. It isn't designed to be something that is difficult.
What do we do
many
then,
instances.
Chief, about the officer that, and that's simplified. I don't think you could get any more simpler than that. But the officer that when you ask that officer, why did you stop me? That maybe even coming from the citizen can be abrasive.
Yes, but that's
Then that
typically.
officer doesn't say
Now-
why he stopped me. Just give me your license.
Now, I watch a lot of body-worn video, and typically the question doesn't come out just the way you put it.
Of course not.
Okay?
You got me. You got me.
There are usually a few expletives in there.
Yeah.
And they don't, you know, it just depends. So,
Oh, okay. Let's just have this dialogue then.
Okay.
We're just talking back and forth.
Yes, sir.
And so then we have the police officer in authority.
Mm-hmm.
We have the citizen that's been stopped by the police officer. Police stops this conversation. The citizens say expletive. Why did you stop me? Sir, give me your license. Expletive. So then, is there a responsibility then on the authority in that situation to not give in to the emotions of that citizen?
Absolutely. You know what? It's so easy to buy into that.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I'm a very strong believer in is de-escalation.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and so it's just the way that you talk to people. Now, I can get angry and yell back and scream back, or I can say, you know what? You know, the only thing I wanted to do was to give you a warning. But in order for me to do that, I still need your license, registration, and proof of insurance. And the reason for that is right back here, you have no brake lights whatsoever. And the only way that you'll know that is somebody behind you tells you that.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
That's the
Yeah.
escalator, right?
See,
That's
that's de-escalation. And I think that's what, And I think on both ends of this, the citizen has to understand, as Chief said, that we can avoid some things by just communicating,
Absolutely.
turning that dome light on, saying to that officer, here's my information right here, here's my information. But then there's an expectation on that officer that if that situation gets out of hand, to de-escalate the situation. Thank you, Chief.
De-escalation is tremendously important because look at it like this. Even myself or even you, anyone going down the street, one of the most nervous encounters you can have is lights coming on behind your car and pulling you over because you just don't know, what did I do? What's happening? What is this? What is that? And so the easiest thing that we can do is take the hostility out of the transaction and just explain what's going on.
Great.
And a part of that too, Chief, is what you mentioned, is the training.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it starts at the top, the leadership. You just, talked about de-escalation. If they're not taught that, if that hadn't been ingrained in them, then their thought process is kind of the militarization and the kind of bully. I got the uniform on. You do as I say.
Right.
So it's great, Chief, that
Yeah.
you said that
Yeah.
because that's important.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, serving and protecting is what it's all about. And again, it starts by what I said earlier. You just don't know who's in that car, what their mindset is, or what that officer's mindset is. But if it's ingrained in them that de-escalation is very important, then I think they'll always kind of lean toward de-escalation more than agitation.
Great,
So I think that's great.
Great.
think
Chief,
that's
I want to
wonderful.
thank you for focusing on training, because I think along with training and, which probably is a part of training, and being community-minded are those things that cause the rebuilding and the restoration of trust between the police department and the community, I think.
Well,
yes.
the important thing is you have to look at it like this. Some people, everyone comes from different backgrounds, and the sooner we recognize the differences in people, the better off we are. Not everyone grew up in a two-family household. Not
That's right.
everyone had a mother and a father. Not everyone had someone in charge of their household who wasn't on drugs or alcohol. Not everyone had a home to go to. Some people grew up in foster care. And so the sooner we recognize the differences in people and recognize where they're coming from, then we know a little bit better how to address the situation and know that everybody has a different history, a different background, different interactions. And the faster we can bring that down, the better off we are. And that is why I wanted to make sure that I introduce more training. But that is why I also wanted to make sure that we introduce more community engagement, like the food giveaway.
Great.
Because what does that do? That creates another opportunity for another transaction between the community and police that is not of a hostile nature. It gives officers an example of being a humanitarian towards the community and not everything being negative as it relates to the police department.
Great, great, great. Another question. Is it against the law to record the police?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that was a real simple question. And so then, if it's not, what are some points or pointers that we can give the citizen? Because that can, and as a police officer, that probably could be somewhat agitating for somebody with a phone. I'm watching you, I got you on camera, that kind of thing.
It should not be. The thing is, if I'm doing what I'm supposed to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
grab 3 cameras, grab 3 cell phones.
I love it, Chief.
Yeah.
The only thing that I would tell people is listen to direction. If the officer is conducting an investigation and he tells you to back up out of the way, please back up out of the way, because he may have knowledge and information that you don't know.
Great.
He may know that the person I'm dealing with in this car is wanted for a robbery down the street, and I know that there are guns in this car, and I've got to take them into custody.
Right.
To whereas you're there, oh, no, I'm going to record. And it's like, okay, ma'am, you need to back up. Just listen.
Right.
And so that way it keeps everyone safe.
That's great.
And
That's
can I also say that the filming, in my opinion, and the chief hit it on the head, that if you're doing what you're supposed to do, then it's going to protect you from frivolous, accusations. So it protects the officer as well, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It takes your word against his word out of it.
Exactly.
The best evidence is the camera.
Yeah.
So I agree. So, if you're doing what you're supposed to do, you should welcome the camera, in my opinion.
Great. Did you?
No, I was just echoing what they were saying. It was good stuff about the camera, because I've been hearing 2 or 3 different things, and you have some police officers that tell people, you're not supposed to be filming me. What do you mean? You film me if I want to. What are you talking about? It's my phone. It's not your phone. But I get that. Thanks a lot, Chief, for that. Really appreciate that.
All right. What are the rules then, Chief, for searching someone's vehicle?
Good.
I want to.
Put you on the spot.
I wanted to ask about that one there, man, because I've heard so many stories about this, man. So I really want to know about
the chief just
searching
threw
the
him-
car.
chief
So
just
this
threw
is
him a
good one.
curveball.
This is good.
Well, searching the car.
Let me ask a few questions
Okay.
leading.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Searching a car, it's several things that, as a police officer, if I'm approach a car and it has to be something as if in plain view. I have to have a reason to search your car. I just can't walk up and say, hey, can I search your car?
Right.
If I walk up to you, if it's a normal traffic stop and there's a smell of marijuana, that's a probable cause to search your vehicle.
You hear that, citizen?
Okay?
The police officer walk up to your car and they smell weed, marijuana. Can I say that in the pulpit? I just did. Then they can search your car. Go ahead.
Right. That's a kind of loaded question. But like I said, on a normal traffic stop, that would be one of the reasons I can search your vehicle.
So then, if there is no probable cause.
Okay?
On probable cause.
Okay, no, I want to go back. So if I'm on a traffic stop, the very easiest way to search your car is by consent. Okay? Yes. And it's a simple question. Do you mind if I search your vehicle? Now, the difference is a lot of people don't know that they can say, no, officer, I don't want to have my car searched this evening.
You can say no.
And that is the easiest form of transaction or communication between an officer to gain consent.
I hear that, Chief, but why would you ask that question? Do you have even cause? Do you have to have cause to ask that question?
Well, you can have reasonable suspicion, but lack probable cause.
Okay.
Okay? And so in order to affirm your suspicion, whereas you don't have probable cause, even if you do, sometimes you can simply ask, do you mind if I search your vehicle? However, if I walk up to your car and you open the window and this big cloud of marijuana smoke comes back, or I'm driving down the street and every time you take off, the smell of marijuana comes back, well, now you have more than just reasonable suspicion to, yes. Yes.
Let me just take one step further too. I agree. Consent is one way.
Causing the,
suspicion.
right.
But at the same time, let's say someone in the car has a warrant and they're taken into custody, then an inventory of the car can be done. And that's not a search.
Yeah.
People think under law that's a search. An inventory is different than a search. An inventory is to protect the officer from someone saying, I had a Rolex watch in there, y'all took me to jail, so now Birmingham PD owes me for a Rolex watch.
Of course, it has to be the driver of the car. The car has to be.
That taken into custody, and let's say, the passenger is there, but the passenger is obviously unable to drive, maybe he's drunk, he's smoking well, just giving an example. Obviously, one of the main things, oftentimes we always get questions about inventory. And that inventory is not a search, it's just a legal principle that allows you to take inventory of what's in the car. So when the car is impounded under the Safe Streets Act, then that person can't come back and say, I had a wrong person in the car, you gotta owe me that.
But if you find an ounce of weed in the inventory,
Correct, absolutely.
so where do we
You
go
can
from
be
there?
charged,
Yes,
you can be charged. The driver?
yes,
The driver can be charged as well?
yes.
You can be
What I'm
charged.
saying is if he don't know the weed is in there, is what I'm saying. If he don't know the marijuana is in there,
The-
and it's not his.
I think at that point, you got to prove
that-
that.
That's what I'm saying. I want to make sure.
And that gets to what's called actual
Possession,
or constructive possession.
right.
All right, actual possession, I'm gonna give you an example real quick. Constructive possession is this beautiful lady, she has a purse. Although it's not in her pocket, it's still her purse. And the law recognizes that most people who have drugs not gonna keep in their pocket. All right, so actual is in your pocket, I find it, you're charged. Constructive is that based on all the circumstances, that we can still relate that these drugs are yours. You're in the car, it's on the driver's seat, you're seen driving the car, they pull you over, they never lose sight of you, and you're seen reaching down. We can make a good faith argument that based on all the circumstances that the drugs are still yours. So that's kind of, without getting too much into legalese about constructive possession. Yeah. Correct.
Anything else you want to say on that?
No, go ahead, he's got it.
Now, this is straight social media piece right here. This still on a search. I was looking at a video the other day, and a gentleman did not agree or did not consent for someone to search their vehicle. At that moment, the police officer got on the mic and said, "Send me a canine, send me a dog." So if the person did not consent, can they send then for a dog to sniff and then gain probable or reasonable suspicion or probable cause from that?
So it depends on the state. Now, that's a very broad and general question, but sometimes various states have different regulations and laws. But it can be done as long as it's within the normal time frame of that traffic stop. If it takes me 10, 15 minutes to write a citation and that dog is within that window of time, there's
So with so that police officer doesn't have to have suspicion first, then call the dog? Or can the dog be the suspicion? Create the suspicion?
Yeah, and the standard is, Chief is right, the standard is, the initial inquiry is, why did you stop the car?
right.
Which the chief said, why you stopped the car? And if the reason you stopped the car is valid, and then they end up calling a K-9 because you won't consent, per se, all right? Now, the law is clear that the standard is that you cannot have an unreasonable amount of time lapse with a person on the side of the road waiting on a dog.
Right.
Gotcha.
Can't do it, because then it becomes kind of involuntary confinement. You got this person sitting there. Technically, they're not under arrest.
Right.
So the law is clear that it can't be an unreasonable amount of time. Now, they don't set a certain standard. They don't say 30 minutes, 40 minutes. It just say, under the circumstances, what's reasonable.
Reasonable.
What's reasonable. And a court would end up making that determination. And
Gotcha.
if they say that it's not reasonable, they're going to throw it out. And if they say it's reasonable, then you go to trial from there.
Okay.
And I can give you a good example
Yes, sir.
of sometimes why that would happen. Let's say he's driving Danny's car, but Danny has a warrant for his arrest on that car for narcotics, marijuana, or drug some type of drug possession. And when they stop him, he says, that's not me. Well, you mind if I search the vehicle? Oh, no. Okay. You explain the reason for your stop, whether it's speeding, this, that, or the other. You recognize that there's some type of narcotics or narcotics relation to this vehicle. Dogs in area, run it through to ensure that the connection of the narcotics to this vehicle or warrant or involvement, and you just never know. And I know you may have a different take on that one.
So that's communication then, because you got to communicate to that citizen then that here's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And the law may say, well, no, I'm a police officer. This is what I know I have to do. But I think that it's necessary then to communicate to that citizen that, hey, this is why I'm doing what I do, because there's a warrant on this car. And I'm saying that because we don't want the leadership or the authority to take on that authoritative position and say, well, I'm within my rights and just do it. Yeah, to take on and just say I'm in my rights and just do it, and so which lends to escalating rather than de-escalating a situation. Does that make sense to you?
It does.
Did you want to say something?
It does. Well, and what Chief said, and it goes to a situation, a legal principle they call standing, where a good example is Chris and I are in the car, and Chris is driving, and Chris has a warrant, and Chris is basically, this is his car, and Chris is taken into custody or whatever. Or let's just say a good example is an apartment. That's what typically happens. And they come in, and it's the apartment in Chris' name. I got a room there. I'm just chilling there, but I'm doing my thing in the room. Apartment in Chris' name. Chris is okay with us searching the apartment. But I have a room in there, and I said, no, you can't search that room. Well, I don't have legal standing because it's not my apartment. It's his apartment. Does that make sense? So you can, so, and that's another principle where you don't have standing to object to it because you don't have an interest in it other than you're just here.
Gotcha.
And that goes a little deeper, but again, all of those things are things that you have to consider when it's not just one of those situations where it's just point blank clear.
And I want to add to this too. I think what Chief is doing with, engaging with people, a lot of these conversations need to be had in the neighborhood for better understanding. So those that can understand the law, sometimes, ignorance of the law is no excuse.
Right.
So my thing is, when we're having these conversations and you guys are doing these type of things, this is an opportunity to teach. Hey man, you got any questions you want to ask while we're here giving out this free meat? And they say, hey chief, I got a question, blah, blah, blah. Here's an opportunity now for them to be able to arm themselves with knowledge so when they do get pulled over, it's not I'm scared. It's like, oh man, chief told me this was gonna happen. All I gotta do is do what chief say. You get what I'm saying? And I think, especially with, social media would just blow things out of proportion, man. The camera turned on at the wrong time. So you looking at, you didn't see what the girl spit in the police face. All you doing is seeing the police protecting themselves. See there, he hitting on the girl. Yeah, but she just spit in his face. You get what I'm saying? So a lot of that happens with the social media and especially with, like Chief was saying and like Danny was saying, those that don't know the law. And I've said that, I say that on my radio show all the time. Don't make a fool out yourself if you don't know what's going on. And you got to know it, and if you don't know, you ask.
Gotcha.
And if you want to know more, just sign up for our Citizens Police Academy so that you can come in and know what we're doing, know what's happening within the community, and get a better understanding of the law and also police work within the city of Birmingham.
Gotcha. I hope y'all heard that. You can sign up for the Birmingham Police Citizens Police Academy and go through. You can learn about the laws and what's going on as it relates to the Birmingham Police Department there. A couple of more questions and we're going to get out of the way. I'm going to take this one off Facebook. I want to take this one off Facebook. It says the average person cannot curse on a job. why is it okay for officers to get out of their vehicles cursing and yelling? Now, this is on here,
I ain't never had that happen.
I almost know what your answer is there, but
Okay, so let me explain something to you. In my mind, it is not okay. And quite frankly, this is one of the areas that I really, really want to address within the department because I find it not acceptable. And this was one of the reasons that I started the training for every officer every other month.
Gotcha.
Because we have to drill down and hone in on professionalism.
Gotcha.
I believe in professional law enforcement, professional training, knowing what you're doing. And the point of the matter is, we've got, in order for folks within the community to respect us, we have to respect everyone else.
great. One, maybe two more questions. Here's one. What are the rules for, does somebody have their hand up?
No.
What are the rules for body cams? When do they, maybe on a traffic stop, or searching of a home, picking up a felon, serving a warrant? What are the rules? When does it go on? How long does it have to be on? All of those things.
We have tons of rules related to a body worn, and officers are required to turn them on for all of the above that you mentioned, traffic stops, everything. It has, as they mentioned earlier, it has worked to defuse a lot of things, and it has also worked in both directions to show what did occur, things that were alleged that did not occur, and it has also shown me some patterns and practices that we need to work on to improve, to provide more training and things of that nature.
If you will, what are the accountability measures for that, for those rules not being adhered to?
Oh, no, there's definitely a discipline related to it for not turning on your body camera in addition to repeated violations.
Great. Last question, if nobody else want to jump in, and it's not like some grand finale question. Arresting someone. What are the rules for arresting someone? What is an arrest? Rules for putting, and I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff in here, putting handcuffs on somebody, those kind of things. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that, kind of let you kind of filter.
Well, that's all over the place.
What is an arrest?
You know, when we have sufficient evidence to believe that a crime has been committed and this is the person who has committed the crime, and we have sufficient evidence or witness statements, et cetera, to show that this person had involvement in a crime, and so typically that's when we place them under arrest.
Placing them under arrest, is that, when are they typically under arrest? When you say it, when you put cuffs on them?
Well, you know, typically, I guess you're thinking of maybe a lawful detention or versus an arrest.
Yes.
Either one, you know, when the officer tells you you're under arrest, you're no longer free to leave. You're definitely
So
going
handcuffs
to
do not have to be
jail.
on you. Once an officer say you're under arrest, you are no longer free to leave. I just wanted you guys to hear that. Okay.
Well, that's the first sign of communication, to let you know what's going on, what's happening. You're under arrest for X, Y, Z. Place your hands behind your back, etc. You're no longer free to leave.
Gotcha. All right. I think that's good. That's good. I appreciate you, sir. I hope I didn't feel like I was.
And let me just add this, because just for the listeners too, that, you know, once you're under arrest, you know, just from an educational piece, that's, you know, you're talking about, as the Chief said, detaining someone versus arresting someone. When you're arresting, it's called like custodial arrest. Custodial arrest, you know, and at that point, you know, that's when Miranda and all that stuff kicks in.
Okay.
Get right
So
back
what is
silent.
what is then a lawful detainee?
Well,
Is there such thing?
A lawful detention is what
Yes.
you're referring to.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lawful detention is when I believe that there is some type of crime afoot and that you have some involvement and I'm conducting an investigation. Or a lawful detention is, believe it or not, can be something as simple as a traffic stop. You are being detained for whatever violation, and essentially the traffic citation is your agreement to appear on certain date or take care of the violation.
Great. Awesome. All right, we'll start here. 30 seconds.
Closing remarks?
Closing remarks. I'm
All
sorry.
right.
Closing
So
remarks.
at the end of the day, for me, what I would love to see is some of the acknowledgement of trauma, the multi-generational trauma, the layers of trauma, even some of the oppression within the systems. Those are things that have to be addressed, right? And then on the part of leadership, just doing some of that inner works. And I'm really thankful to hear that we do have mental health care and some of the trauma, healing the trauma of the leaders and the officers. I think that will be a great start.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited because I've had a chance to really hear Chief. I've heard him speak before, but talk about the leadership role. And I've always I tell my kids this too. The attitude reflects leadership. So if you have the attitude of making sure that they're going to be great leaders out here in this community, that's going to be a great thing. But also the onus is on the citizens. You know, you got to have the same type of, you got to give respect in order to get it. Just because this cop pull you over, that don't mean you got to show your behind every time that happens.
Exactly.
My thing is, let him direct you, you listen to him, and it's all about listening. I said that earlier. But once again, Chief, that's really good that you're doing that with and the community engagement. I think that's peeling the onion. You know, when you peel the onion back and get to the center of it, that's when you know you're at home. So that's one of the main things I'm really happy about, and I'm glad I came here for this tonight.
Thank you so much, D.A. Carr.
I'll be brief, but I want to tell the listeners real quick about something I think, because you said it's educational. Let me say that down at the courthouse, what we do have that is very important, we have diversionary courts. Here's why they're important, because if you plead in and get into a diversionary court and you complete that diversionary court, a judge writes dismiss with prejudice. That means now you can have that expunged off your record. I get so many people talking about expungements, and most people come to court and they walk out and say, man, my lawyer got the case dismissed, great. Well, the arrest going to be on your record.
Right.
But you complete a diversionary court, the arrest and everything go away. So we have mental health court, we have theft court now, we have drug court, we have veterans court, all these things for low-level offenders that will help them. So I just want to make sure everybody know the importance of that. They say I can't give legal advice, so that was just a quick editorial about what we have and why diversionary courts are important. So take advantage of it.
Real quick, where can we get the education on those courts? Just a little more information.
I can provide that information to you, Pastor, if I need to email it to you or whatever, and there's some more things that we're doing to deal with chronic absenteeism because the pipeline to prison is real, which is called the Helping Families Initiative.
Wow.
So we're doing a lot. How we deal with the money bail issue under what's called the VPRAY, or risk assessment tool that takes money out of the equation.
Wow.
And basically, you stay in jail either because you have a heck of a resume or because you committed a serious offense, not because you don't have the inability to pay and you're poor. So there are a lot of things we're doing that we can talk about, but I just wanted some of that information to come out so people who are listening will know that, and I can email you some of that information because I think it's important that people in your congregation and in this community know about it.
Great. Thank you so much. Here you go. Chief.
So 2 years ago, when I started this job as chief of police, I started going on listening sessions throughout the community to listen to what people had to say, listen to many of the things that were going on. But I also mentioned that I would build the police department that you want to see in your community.
Great.
And that is still my goal. But there's one thing I need.
All right.
The one thing that I need is for everybody to do their part.
Great.
My goal is to get the officers to do their part. I need the community members to do their part. I need those who come in contact with officers to do their part. And working together as one community, police department being a part of that community, we can conquer things and move forward in a very positive manner.
Great, thank you so much, Chief. Detective Cal Johnson.
One word: communicate, communicate, communicate.
Great.
We have an opportunity to communicate to the citizens, and the citizens have the opportunity to communicate to us. The more we communicate one with another, I think we will bridge the gap and explode into the future. Thank you.
All righty, I missed it, but we've closed out now, and that's my best friend on that question. All right, all right. Chief, since you said that, I'm going to do it.
That's rule number one.
That's rude. Yeah, be a friend. Be a friend. So the question is this, and it is: when detaining a person during a stop, why do they need to be handcuffed and told that they are not being arrested?
Okay, so there are instances where an officer will handcuff someone for officer safety reasons,
Okay.
they might say. So if you have one officer and you have 3 individuals,
Okay.
and that officer is waiting for additional backup, or let's say it's one officer and one individual, but that officer is conducting an investigatory stop, meaning that something has occurred back here, and he believes that you might be involved, but he's conducting that investigation to either develop additional probable cause to finish that investigation, or he's waiting for additional information from the crime scene or situation that's behind him in order to make a clear determination. And there are times that people are handcuffed. The most important thing that the officer can do is to talk to that individual and tell them what's going on. I'm conducting an investigation for something that occurred back here. This individual who left the scene was wearing this cream-colored suit with a salmon-colored shirt. He had a salt and pepper beard that kind of looked just like you, and they mentioned your glasses. So, I just wanted to stop and make sure that you are not the person who was involved in the crime back here.
That's good, and that's real education for me, even as an ex-police officer, because I was under the impression that putting handcuffs, and that's why I asked the question the way I did earlier, that putting handcuffs on someone was arresting them.
No, and let me say that there's case law that says that that can be done for officer safety. Matter of fact, performing a pat-down is for officer safety.
Correct.
To make sure
Correct.
that person doesn't have a weapon or anything on them. So, yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think Chief is right. I mean, creating that conversational atmosphere and making sure you let them know, look, hey, I'm just doing this for my safety and yours. You're not under arrest, but here's what's going on. I think that helps tremendously versus jumping out the car, opening the door, taking them out of handcuffs.
And I'm really trying not to push the conversation. I was trying to stay to 75 to 90 minutes.
Right.
So we were talking about this a little earlier. My wife and I had this conversation, and that is this, is that as it relates to trauma and systematic or situational or trauma from years past, a black person's mindset to get into a police car is different. And so, and this is just as a pastor from just talking to people. And so when you see or when you're asked to let me pat you down, when you're saying, I'm not detaining you, but I need to put handcuffs on you while I do this investigation. And I understand that. I'm with you. I hear you well. But the average, I won't say the average, but there is this citizen that's afraid, and that's what we got to talk about, this whole thing of trust, that's afraid to get in a police car.
Absolutely.
Even under arrest, that's just afraid to get in a police car. Because again, we're being inundated every day with social media by what happens when when citizens encounter police cars. And so I don't even know that I'm asking a question now, Chief, but just making the whole point of knowing how, as a police officer, to deal with a situation, especially if that citizen is not under arrest and you're conducting an investigation. Know how to deal with that in a way that citizen is not fearful, sometimes even of their life, or just fearful of being detained, beat up, and those kind of things. Once again, let me do say that I being in Birmingham and being a Birmingham police officer, I don't know of a wide range of those kind of incidents happening. But I'm saying this because there is a phobia within the community, if you will, as it relates to just encountering the police. And I guess this can be kind of our outro, if you will, is that as we think through all of that, we've got to do the work. I hear you, Chief. And your statement was, we're going to do our part. And the community needs to do their part. Those that are the citizen that's being stopped, I know that's a hard ask, but they got to do their part, because we don't know what's on that person's mind when they're being stopped. But I hear you, and I think we do have to do a lot of work right in that area, because we have fear on one side, and we have on the other side the authority that says, I gotta do the job, because if I don't, then I put everybody else in jeopardy.
Right. Well, let me say one thing. We tend to have our thought process closed just on how it affects us as individuals, but we're not the only ones who've had to endure trauma. Okay, you mentioned trauma. We're not the only ones who've had to endure trauma. There are tons of immigrants who are coming into this country who have had to endure trauma, and their treatment in various countries and coming to the U.S. and dealing with the police, they have a different type of trauma. I remember years ago we were doing various tests, just like when you're typically doing a high-risk felony stop and a person is armed and you place them down and you place the knee on the shoulder blade of the individual. So we thought we'd try something different and place folks on their knees so that people didn't have to lay on the ground or this or that. And then different people from various countries would get up and fight. They'd run because they viewed it as you're about to come up and shoot them in the head. And so there are various people who have experienced trauma all over this world.
Right.
And the same trauma that she's referring to of dealing with the police is the same thing that you're talking about, being placed in the backseat of a police car. Those who have served time in prison, and now you are arresting them again, and in their mind, there's no way I can go back there.
Yeah.
You know, and they'll fight to the end because in their mind, they don't want to endure the same trauma they endured before.
So can I say one thing to that? I do think that what we have to do is identify that people of color have experienced different types of trauma. So I do agree what you're saying, because everybody has from so many different backgrounds. But, however, there is a level of trauma that people of color have experienced. And if we have that way of thinking, we don't ever want to communicate to leadership that we're going to treat all trauma the same. Because what it can do is, from a leader, is, well, listen, you've had trauma, but so has he. And nobody's trauma is more, real or more important.
All lives matter.
Right? And just exactly, because all I heard was all lives matter. And when we, even in the conversation, I know you didn't mean that, but even in the conversation with the leaders and the police officers, are we identifying what the triggers are? Now, this may be a trigger for the Black community, and this may be a trigger for this community. Having those in-depth conversations, I think, may be helpful.
Great. I hear you. I know that's not what you're saying.
That is not what I was saying, and it is so far from what I was saying. What I was saying is that we in law enforcement, we have to recognize just the general triggers, because we are dealing with people from all over. Right. We have to recognize the general triggers for different people and stay focused on what we're doing, because just like you mentioned, the person who can't see being placed in a
Right.
police vehicle,
Right.
that's one of the triggers for that individual.
community.
Yes, or that community. And so that's what I was going.
Right,
It had nothing to do with this life or that life, just.
Right. I think she heard that.
Yeah.
I think, but at the same time, the clarity of,
I just want to clarify.
and I wanted to give you that opportunity, of course, of course. And so, yes, so thank you to all of us, amen, that sat and through this almost 90 minutes of time tonight, and shared this conversation for the people. I've had a conversation, to those of you that are watching us, with most of us that are sitting here tonight, and they've agreed to do a subsequent conversation. Once again, tonight is a conversation for the people. They've agreed to do a conversation with the people. And so we would have to schedule that, plan and schedule that if we're going to do that. And so once again, I think this has been wonderful. I think it's been amazing. Once again, we just had the vision and heart to do it. I'm so glad that as I made the phone call to each of you, I think I called, of course, I'm readily accessible to Detective Kyle, so we talked about it. But I think I called D.A. Carr, I called Sergeant Malden on your behalf, and everybody was readily saying, this is a conversation we need to have. And I pray and hope that you guys have been blessed by helping the community with this conversation and going forward, so that we can continue to do these kind of conversations, so the community can hear the voices of all of us. These are, in my view, these are pertinent voices for the community, and I think we need to continue to do that. Chief talked about a video that they, how long is the video? You just did it, or? Yeah. And so we'll talk about some of the things that we talked about, what to do when you encounter the police. Is that available to the public? So it's going to be placed on the Birmingham Police Department's website, and so go and check that out. You have probably much more information than you even got tonight. And so thanks again for doing that. I think if that's everything, everybody good? Everybody good? Any more? Anything? All right, so sitting in your house, wherever you ought to give a hand clap to all of those that were a blessing to you tonight to give you this information. And thanks to some people who just kind of showed up. Thank you guys for coming and being a part of the conversation. I'm going to pray us out. Father, we do thank you for the time. I thank you for all of those that helped us to share in this conversation tonight. And I pray the blessing of the Lord over their lives. I pray that same blessing over the communities in which we serve, that you would bless, cover, and keep us, and bring us to that place of tranquility. Bring us to that place of peace. Bring us to that place of hope and walking as a community, so that we can thrive together calling ourselves and coming to that place of oneness and unity. That we pray in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen, and thank God. God bless you.
Amen.